Good evening. This is the Equity and Student Achievement Committee of the Whole meeting. Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I make that motion. All in favor? Aye. And now we will have to go into an executive session to discuss matters leading to the appointment of an individual and matters related to the collective bargaining agreement. And so after we have the executive session, we will return and continue with the meeting. Thank you.
Take the motion.
Can I have a motion to go into executive session?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening again. We are back into our regular session. We've ended our executive session. I would first like to acknowledge that one of our commissioners, Bill Clark, is not here with us. He is stuck on a plane. I'd like to, if there's no objections, to have that to be an excused absence. Any objections to that? Okay, thank you very much. And the next item on the agenda is speakers, but I don't think that we have any speakers for this evening, either in person or in no comments were submitted. And I will offer the board to consent to the agenda items A through L. Any issue with us voting on all of those resolutions as a bundle? Any objection to that?
And then you need to take a motion.
Okay, so I'd like to entertain a motion for resolutions 2021 2265 through 2021 2275. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Can I get a second? Any questions about those resolutions? Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, for Resolution 4D, which is Resolution 2021-22-67. Let me just make sure it's the right one. Oh, I think it got moved. Actually, it's going to be 2021-22-68 because we made a move from A to L. We resorted those. So Resolution E, 4E, number 68. I know that we're voting tonight on the Bente contract, but I just had a question about retroactive pay. So I did notice that some folks are going to be starting in the $12 range, some in the $13, some in the $14 range. And if we vote tonight, when folks do go to the $15 an hour, will we be able to retroactive and compensate those individuals or make them to the same amount? Thank you. And just to be clear, we also have budgeted for that. Okay. Thank you, Chris.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Can I get an aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
hold on. We're voting on the computer
Oh,
too.
okay.
We're waiting for Kali to pop
okay.
it up on us.
It should be, do you guys see your pop-up yet?
Nope,
Oh,
not here. Yeah,
no,
there it
not
is.
yet.
Does it matter if you have one of the resolutions
Yeah,
open?
I got it.
Where does it
It'll be
I don't
right in the
have
middle
it.
of your screen when it shows up.
Oh, now it did. So there's a little bit of a delay.
Okay.
Madam Chairperson,
Yep.
Yes.
just a point of
All
question. Are we, and this is to the parliamentarian too, I had the pop-up, I voted. Are we to also articulate our vote verbally or not necessary anymore?
You don't have to, but it's really up to you all want to do it that way. It doesn't have, it's simply recorded, so it's viewable by the public.
Okay. So, Madam Chairperson, I don't know how other chairs are going to proceed, but I know when I am chairing meetings, given the technology, I don't personally, personally will not call for a verbal vote. I don't know about you, Madam.
I just have some clarity around that. So the public, how will the public know how we voted?
The scoreboard is up for the public. That is a separate link that the public can also watch. They can just click onto the scoreboard. They don't even have to watch the meetings. They can just look at the scoreboard and they will see that persons are the online voting as it happens. If it pleases anyone, I would recommend doing both for now until we get used to it, because that way I can hear, and if someone, for example, is maybe not paying attention or something, I can vote for them based on their, or they didn't see the pop-up, I can vote for them and we can move on instead of waiting. for people.
Yeah, I just want to add though, like, if the public is watching the board meeting and then they have to click a link, this is also new for them and our parents especially. So personally, I do want us to have a verbal vote until our community and our parents also get used to this new technology, because this is our first time for us today.
Yes, I know that Tech also has that showing to the public as well, live stream, that they're also seeing the scoreboard.
At
on
the
their
same
at
time as the
same
board
as
meeting?
Yes.
So if I'm watching the board meeting from like Facebook or YouTube right now, you have the scoreboard side by side?
We will.
Okay, but not yet, but we will.
We're trying to.
Okay.
President White?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Is so long as the vote is being displayed real time, that is critical to just using the computers. If it was not, then I agree that we would need a verbal vote. But if in fact it's being displayed on the screen, that would seem to provide the public real-time information. But I don't disagree with anybody that says we should take our time with this. And if you all think it is best to have a verbal vote for the time being, I'm not opposed to that.
Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, so aside from whether we do the verbal vote along with our electronic vote, it would be useful just for setting the pace if the clerk or the presiding officer could just declare that the motion passed or was defeated, just as it's sort of a way of benchmarking where we are at on the agenda, if nothing else.
Thank you. So can we give a verbal vote as well?
So I can confirm, once everyone does, I can also just say the motion passes 6-0, no abstaining, and there's one person not present at the vote, so.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Can I get a motion for resolutions 2021-2276 through 2021-2279?
Oh, wait, we got to take these ones individually.
These ones individually? Okay. Can I get a motion for resolution 2021-2276?
Motion.
Can I get- All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do I have a pop-up screen? Okay. Any questions about this resolution? Sorry, but any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Pop up there.
Okay. Thank you all for helping me out at this meeting.
Okay,
All right.
that is approved 6-0.
All right, President White?
No, I was just going to ask if the clerk was just going to go ahead and approve that, note that vote. Thanks.
Can I get a motion for resolution 21-2277?
Motion.
Second? Any questions about resolution 2021-2277? Okay. Waiting for the pop-up. Did I call for the vote? All in favor? Aye. Any noes, any nays? All right.
Just waiting on your button. Oh, there we
Okay.
go. And that passed 6-0 as well.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for resolution 21-2278?
Motion.
Second? Any questions about this resolution, 21-2278? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
I didn't get the pop-up. Oh, there it is.
That motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for resolution 21-2279?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, any discussion or any?
Can
Yes.
you just go back, tell me who motioned and seconded on that one?
Motion.
Okay,
I seconded it.
thank you.
Thank you. Any conversation, Commissioner LeBron?
I just want to congratulate Cam and welcome her into this role. And I really hope that all of our school community and our larger community in the Rochester, the greater Rochester, also welcome her and support her in this role. And I look forward to working with her over the course of being a mom with a kid who's going to go into sports. So welcome, Cam. Congratulations. I'm just excited about Cam
Thank
having the
you.
job.
Commissioners, I'm going to allow the superintendent to introduce her new hire, DeMario.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott. Good evening to everyone. We have the fortunate pleasure of having our newest hired in addition to our cabinet. Mr. DeMario Strickland comes to us from Buffalo. He will begin at the end of August, and I thought it just might be helpful for him to just introduce himself and to say hello to our commissioners and our public.
Welcome.
Good evening, President White, Vice President Elliott, fellow board commissioners, and obviously Madam Superintendent. I'm very excited to be here. I look forward to bringing my talents in regards to receivership to the city of Rochester. I've been fortunate enough to turn around 2 receivership schools or go through a turnaround process of 2 receivership schools, and I really invest a lot of my time into teaching and learning, and I'm excited to work with the principals here collaboratively in Rochester on the high school end, but obviously everyone else, and excited to be working with you all. So thank you for having me and instilling the confidence that is needed to be in front of you, and I look forward to this great opportunity.
Welcome.
Thank you, DeMario. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott.
Thank you. President White?
Yeah, I apologize, Madam Chairperson, but I did want to say very briefly, with respect to Resolution 78 and 77, I wanted to thank the superintendent, the negotiating team at the district, as well as East High School. These are difficult agreements. These are difficult times we live in. These are difficult agreements to put together. And I wanted the staff, including legal, human services, and the folks at East to know that we appreciate how difficult that task is, and that these agreements allow us to bring some stability and therefore progress to our students and our families. So to those folks that I did not mention, I want you to know the board has your thanks and appreciation for these agreements. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, President White. So we'll move on now to the review and acceptance of the minutes of the ESA Committee of the Whole from June 8th, 2020. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Those minutes are accepted.
We're going to vote.
Yes, give me
Oh, we
one
gotta vote
second.
for
I
it.
just had to refresh the board docs really quickly.
Just want to say hello to Mike Schmidt, who's home and still, yeah. Hi, Mike.
Good evening, everyone.
Just wanted to say hello. Good to see you.
I'm still vertical.
That's one way
Okay.
of putting it.
Right.
Minutes are available now for vote? Waiting on a few people to submit their vote?
Okay.
No.
Oh.
Waiting on Commissioner Malloy and Commissioner Adams?
I did.
Thank you. The minutes passed 6-0.
Thank you. So we will have a presentation by our Chief Academic Officer with regard to textbook adoption process and calendar. Dr. Black?
Good evening, all. I'm coming to you to bring you an update on our textbook processes and adoption calendar. As we know that everything we do in academics is tied to our strategic plan, namely our focus area around engaging, which is our high quality and learning environments. As we build this time around textbook adoption and selection, I want to just highlight our guiding principles that are helping us to drive our work forward. The first one being that every child deserves to engage with grade level content every day. And so as we think about textbook adoption and selection, we know that grade level access is paramount to what we do. The second guiding principle includes that we have to have our students engage with high quality, culturally responsive experiences where they are affirmed, seen, and valued every day, even within the materials that we select for them to use. And that we have an obligation as a district to provide an equitable experience for every student across the district that is not dependent on where they go to school or where they live. And so as we move the textbook adoption and selection process, these items, these principles are how we are moving through ensuring that what we provide academically is well for students. As I shared before, when we think about academics in our overview, a core academic program is guided and grounded in a high quality curriculum, robust instruction, and clear and deliberate assessment. When you think about textbooks, textbooks are part of a high quality curriculum. So while that graphic is not very large, if you look kind of in the middle in the red, you will see that textbooks is part of our curriculum. So as we ground while we're talking about textbook selection and adoption this evening, we know it's ensuring that what we provide students as well and the materials that we choose are well-rounded for our students to achieve. I'm going to go back a moment. So on the bottom, you see the notion for Ed Reports. Ed Reports is an educational repository that tells us as school districts and educators what curricular resources are rated well, aligned to standards, provide robust experiences. And so as we are thinking about the textbook selection and the materials we're putting in front of students as part of our robust curriculum, we are definitely going into Ed Reports to see things that are rated green, so that at the starting point, we're not spending time reviewing materials that are not standards aligned for students. So there's two models in terms of choosing materials. There's the model which we've engaged with before, which is vendors come, present to us, present to a group, we review, we select, we buy, we implement. That's the non-pilot, full district implementation model. The other model, which you've heard a lot about, is the pilot with implementation feedback, which means we procure a smaller amount of aligned materials. We put them in a couple of rooms, couple of classrooms, let teachers engage, move with them, see how kids do with them, get some feedback, and then decide what's the right level of material that we're going to engage with across the district, across the grade level, or across classrooms. This is very small, but this is the steps to an ideal textbook selection process. And what it outlines for you all is that a content director, usually a facilitator, will say, okay, according to our adoption calendar, we have to do an adoption. We have to select new materials. In our case, for the 2021 school year, we had a lot of subject areas and disciplines to choose from to initiate this process because a lot of our textbooks have to be updated. After we have a facilitator, again, usually a content director, we recruit our team. Our team can be principals, school leaders, school team members, parents, teachers, all the folks whose voices we feel like we have to have around the table to say, is this instructional material or is this textbook right for what we want to accomplish, and is it aligned to our standards? When we do that, we think about how do we calibrate or have all of the folks around the table be looking for the same things that help us meet our vision. So that's our iterator reliability and our calibration, so that we all talk around the table as we're reviewing materials about the same thing. We review the materials, we figure out the consensus meetings, so sometimes materials are doled out and you spend time pouring into them. We have rubrics, we bring all that information back. We choose the 2 or 3 best of the best. We whittle down to the 1 best, and then we say, why is this the one? And then we bring it to the masses to kind of contribute, interpret, engage, and then help us move forward. Our adoption timeline for this year, so we actually didn't go through any formal adoption this year because formal adoption actually ends in bringing the materials to the board for the board to say we formally adopt this under the guidance of the deputy superintendent and the advice of the superintendent. But we did have a full year, first year implementation of our My View, My Vision K-6 ELA materials. And so that adoption happened in 19. We implemented this school year for the first year of implementation of a 5-year contract. It's important to note that because we won't come back to ELA for K-6 for the next 4 years because we're in the middle of an implementation, in the middle of an adoption, which is My View, My Vision. In 21-22, so you've heard a bit of this before, but for the masses, we are doing a limited pilot of Open Sci Ed in our 6-8 middle schools, and we have a cohort of K-5 doing a FOSS science implementation, and we have a couple of other science programs that we're putting inside of classrooms to see which one is the one that's going to meet our needs robustly. So that's that second implementation model, which is we're going to pilot in a couple places, bring people back and say, what did we learn? What did we learn about what our kids know and are able to do? Which one fits best for us? Similar for social studies, we have a K-5 limited pilot of Inquire Ed materials, which speaks to the level of instruction that we want kids to engage in social studies. So those materials are based in the inquiry model, which asks our kids to become critical thinkers and ask questions. And then we're piloting a high school African American studies text called Black History 365, both an electronic version and hard copy for our students and teachers to access to build up the capacity of our students to speak to Black and African American history with a relevant, rigorous, and aligned material. And then finally, we are excited that we are also having a 6-8, so middle school, limited pilot of illustrative mathematics, which also is a standards aligned material and goes along with a lot of the curricular work that has been happening in our math department. So that's 21-22. In terms of an adoption calendar, it's really important to note that you cannot wholesale adopt a whole cadre of books in 1 year, because when you do that, you expend your resources, and then 3 years later, 5 years later, 7 years later, they all expire at the same time, and you never want that to happen. So as we think about our calendar of updating our materials, we focused in middle school first, so that we have, the transition pieces well, and then for 22-23, we know that we have to look at our high school supplemental materials, and so our textbooks for high school will be on the hot seat for 22-23. That is also in alignment with the updating of standards. And so part of the textbook adoption process is also really important, is as standards change, textbook companies have to catch up in order to provide aligned materials with the new standards. In 23-24, we'll go back to elementary mathematics. And then 24-25, we're going to come back to science and social studies and potentially ELA all over again. And so as a calendar thinks about a 5 to 7 year span when textbooks go out, we've thought through 24-25 in terms of how we're going to actually rotate the books in and rotate the books out. Our textbooks are not our only supplemental instructional material. Throughout this time, we also procure supplemental materials, additional text, resources, supplemental manipulatives, so all the things that also make up a curriculum in order to ensure that not just the textbooks is the only thing that teachers or students engage with. And with that, I'll pause. That was short, sweet, to the point, and I am here for all the questions that you have.
Dr. Clark,
Black.
There's some something missing on the slide. For example, if you go on the slide that says adoption timeline continued, school year 21-22, at that bullet that says K-5,
It should say
FOSS and science and
K-5 cohort.
yeah, I don't have.
And limited pilot.
Yeah, that's not
So the
on
limited
here.
pilot describes the limited pilot on this slide describes the varied materials that are going to be in other buildings that are just not FOSS science.
Okay, and then if you go down under social studies, the second bullet, on ours, it just has the T. So yours has studies text, but ours doesn't have that.
Yes, ma'am. We will make sure to get you the updated.
And then the next slide, school year 22-23, high school supplemental support. So I guess that's just about complete there. Okay. All right, any questions? Commissioner Malloy?
I'm
You
just
got
wondering
questions?
if there was any collaboration with East with some of the curricular materials that they've been using, especially textbooks. I know they use Core Plus Math, but also with our high school social studies program. Are we using some of the same materials?
So yes, as we've shared in previous sessions, the one thing about mathematics that's important to highlight is a member of our team is also a former member of the East team, and so there's a natural collaboration that's occurring there in mathematics for high school, 7 through 12. In terms of the other texts and the other core content areas, there is some preliminary collaboration. Our social studies teacher is working with the social studies East team on some of the materials for the Seal of Civic Readiness and what happens in our higher level coursework. In terms of science, we are moving towards inquiry in the dimensions of science. I know that our science director has had preliminary conversations with the science folks over at East to help build that. So that conversation is ongoing and robust, and we're going to continue to do what we know is best for all kids everywhere.
Mr. Powell?
Yeah, so I was listening to your presentation through the lens of the policy
Ma'am.
committee, and in particular, I mean, I know that your adoption process is driven by superintendent's regulation. So adoption process is really rather lengthy, months in the making, and is it fair to say, question number one is it fair to say that when you first begin meeting, you'll be considering adoptions for the subsequent fiscal year? So in your process, are you able to ballpark the cost of an adoption for the following budget? Do you have input into the budget on the textbook line as a committee while you're still evaluating which options you're going to be considering?
Yes, so if history moves forward, we did have input this year on the budget to adopt textbooks and use our Open Sci Ed money for Open Sci Ed. So in the short version, yes, there's always an input. In terms of ballparking cost, depending on the textbook and the instructional materials, it could be a wide range because some things are open source, and so your cost is printing and getting actual physical materials, and some things are actually the hard copy books, so now you're paying for the book and the workbook. And so when we go out and solicit and we get to a point where we've whittled down what we have to one or two vendors, we will then send, okay, so we like you and we like you. We think what you're offering is well. Here's what we need to then outfit. So here's how many classrooms we have. Here's how many students we have. Here are the materials that we want to procure from your pile. And then we get proposals, and then we can whittle from there. So while I've abbreviated it here, the textbook adoption process from soup to nuts is a 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer experience, which is why we forecast out the years by which we're going to do one of them so that people can get their mind around the 1 or 2 content areas we're going to do by year for then implementation the first year. So this is adoption, right? How do we pick it? And then the second piece is implementation. How do we actually use it in classrooms?
That's a really good segue to my next question. So obviously the smoothing out of and doing adoptions every year for a different set, so that we're spending our state textbook aid fully, and that we're rotating through and getting all our adoptions in on a fair basis. But in the case of pilots, you're going to pilot for what, one school year? So it seems to me a pilot is only done in some schools, not all schools. And so you wouldn't be buying the whole 100%. So in those cases, is it prudent to time that pilot adoption for when we have a smaller scale adoption of a different textbook in addition in order to use up all our textbook aid? Or does it make sense to set funds aside in an assigned fund balance for the following year on the assumption that the pilot will then get full-scaled the following school year?
So I can speak to the first part, and I think the financial part probably belongs in another house. But in terms of the rotation of pilots and the brevity or the breadth of when we do them, what you mentioned is true. So sometimes you'll do it for a grade level, right? So we're doing 6 through 8 open sci-ed across the grade levels. Sometimes you do it in a building. We're doing the FOSS science pilot in 4 schools, and they're further along. So while again, I've abbreviated here, it's actually a fuller picture of the entire landscape. You can't do all K-5 content areas at one time because that's one teacher for content areas. So there's a lot of moving pieces that goes into kind of the entire landscape, if you will, and then how you pay for those ebbs and flows to make sure that you're not swelling in one year and not doing a very small something in another year. And again, we can roll out the entire, if that's what the board would love, but this is the adoption process. The adoption with implementation is probably another piece of life.
So are there different reasons why you would pilot other than, as you say, other than what you already discussed of not overwhelming a teacher with 4 different things in the same year, or I mean, are there?
You have considerations about change of standards, which might denote whether you want to buy a new textbook or wait for the update. You have change of pedagogy, so the approach that a textbook might take to share information might be different. In our case of inquiry-based instruction and the shift for science to go to the dimensions of learning, not all materials give you the right stuff to do that kind of teaching. And then it's just, a lot of it is the teacher comfort. So how can we support professional development for a teacher to implement a new textbook and a new set of materials? What does that look like so it, again, feels well? What does our assessment data tell us our kids need? So again, while abbreviated here, it's a longer term, bigger landscape of how you create the right mix of materials and textbooks to ensure that teachers can do the thing we're asking them to do, which is grade level content access. No matter where a kid is, no matter what zip code they come from, where they are seen, valued, and affirmed, we got to have a big picture around what that looks like holistically.
So are there ever times when a pilot is abandoned, where you just go back to square one and choose a different, whole different approach, or pilots almost always scaled up?
So I can't speak to how we've played it out here. In other places, there are times where you are in materials, you figure out those materials are not right, and you decide to pivot. There are times when you scale up. I think as we move through here and we use our textbook adoption process and do our review with due diligence, hopefully we move to a place where we're scaling up and not completely abandoning. The one thing I'll name is that prior to doing any pilot, our content directors have done their due diligence around selecting, again, what's green on ed reports, what meets kind of the expectations around the dimensions or the pedagogy. So we're not going to pilots like, oh, you sent us stuff, let's try it out. There's a little bit more deliberate thinking around how we select the materials to pilot and what the potential is for those to be well and be global.
Commissioner LeBron? Did you have a question? Okay.
Thought you were still going down the aisle,
No,
but that's okay.
Commissioner Malloy's already
Okay.
had one time.
All right, thank you. So a couple of questions here. So Dr. Black, you were not around for some of these conversations, but I do want to re-bring them up. So we did not have a formal process to get rid of old books. And so as a result, we have lots of schools that have old books just sitting there. We also have them in the warehouse. And so I do want us to consider what we're going to do with those books. In the past, I've actually tried to get us to donate those books to business associations who would then ship them to third world countries, and they would ship them. And because we don't have a formal process and it's considered public education, books and dollars, it was just a mess. So I'm a little nervous that we start talking about buying new books and we have a giant collection of old books just sitting around. So a couple of things. So what the process is and what you all have thought about how we're going to, change over these books. I have brought up that bilingual students continue to not have appropriate bilingual books and materials. And I brought that up in 2018. I brought it up in 2019. I will bring it up again in 2021, that continues to be an issue. And then beyond bilingual, I want to uplift the multilingual students, right, who may not, if they speak Nepali or Arabic, don't have materials that are dual language for them that's appropriate, and what we can do around that. And then I know you mentioned a group of parents, vendors, and staff to give feedback and input. We did that before too, and we ended up, I remember that we did this process where we went to the room back here and looked at some of the materials, and there was a few parents, maybe 3 to 5, that were pulled in to ask for feedback, and they had to do a matrix. And in the end, we ended up with a very costly book and materials that I don't even know whatever happened to. I don't even know if it ever even actually got rolled out. But certainly, I have not seen the benefit of it. So it makes me a little leery that that's a process we already have. But I'm also wondering if teachers themselves are being asked about the feedback, because I can tell you from school visits, but also working in the district, that oftentimes these decisions are being made here in central office. And then the teachers themselves are pretty much stuck with materials that they didn't even have input in. And I'm not saying 1 or 2 teachers, because I have to uplift that our teachers, there are lots of diverse visions and voices and styles of teaching. But I certainly would want them involved in these conversations, even if we supply them with all of the resources. If it's just something they don't believe in, they don't believe in. And then finally, I just want to uplift again, because I keep hearing this, like, are we using East curriculum conversation? And I won't go into all the woos on that, but what I will say is that when I did start in 2018, one of the things I requested was a list of all the curriculums that the district had. And we have hundreds of curriculums, hundreds. Some of them are just collecting dust as well. So I just want to put that out there. And I don't necessarily believe that one curriculum is going to be the end-all, be-all, like, miracle worker for the entire district. But certainly we can look at the hundreds of curriculums that we've had, the millions of dollars we have spent over the course of probably a decade or more in gathering those hundreds of curriculums and figuring out, a process that works for us or doesn't work for us. And then lastly, as we have all of these conversations, I would be amiss to not uplift the fact that our actual textbook staff is a very limited amount of staff for the entire district, charters, and private schools, and that it really falls on a very limited amount of individuals. And if we're going to be doing this huge lift the way that you're presenting it, that we also have to fund and support that team. And although they do amazing work, so shout out to Vicki and her team, the reality is that they're very limited, and this is a big lift, and they're going to need the support. And I also want to uplift the fact that Vicki always hires students over the summer to help, and that we fund that and support that so it continues, because it's a good opportunity for our students. And it works for now, but I almost feel like she's operating on a shoestring budget, and she shouldn't be, because this is such a critical piece of textbooks getting to all the schools, and it's just a lot of work for one individual or a small team of individuals and students to uplift for the entire district.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Can you hold on just a?
Yep.
All right,
All right, so I'll go down the list.
okay.
So a lot of what you lifted up, Commissioner LeBrun, is captured in our textbook audit that was issued in this past year in October. So we are working through and have managed to decommission and remove some textbooks from the warehouse. It is a work in progress, which ties to the second piece around shoring up our textbook staff. As part of some of our stimulus initiatives, 2 things we lifted up is to give some temporary help to our textbook team to get us right size. So how do we get everything back to ground zero so that as we add new textbooks over years, we're not putting it on top of some of the old things. So that is a work in progress. In terms of bilingual text, so our core content directors as they're choosing materials and texts, have been very deliberate around choosing or prioritizing vendors and materials that come in multiple languages. Everything from our actually hard copy textbooks to some of our electronic materials that we're using. And so that has been a lift up and a note that we've made internally to address. Same thing with multilingual texts. Those are a little bit harder to come by. And so in order to kind of shore up the gap there, that's where our supplemental text comes. So we might not have a core textbook, but we can find materials that are content aligned, so same kind of ideas that then students can access in their home language. In terms of reviewing materials and that process and teacher feedback, in our ELA adoption, which happened in 19, right before COVID, there was a teacher review team, and over 75 teachers participated in the review and selection, in addition to parents and teachers. So your notes around having teachers have impact and input is noted. And so the pilot for 6-8 Open Sci Ed has teachers working in the summer accessing PD to pull apart that information and really talk to our content director about what is good and what is not so good, and how do we as a district build supplemental supports and materials to address the gaps, because we also recognize that not one textbook can fill all the needs, and that's where your teacher prowess and all the other things come into play to make a well-rounded experience. And I hit all your points. Yes, ma'am.
And Commissioner Malloy, before I get to you, let me just offer any questions to Dr. Jallo. Dr. Jallo, do you have any questions about the textbooks?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Malloy?
Thank you. This is more surrounding implementation, so I know that this comes later. Do we have a sense where the direction that the district is going in terms of providing our students with, I'm going to pull this down, sorry, it's hard to talk, whether or not we're providing our students with online versions of textbooks, or if we're doing just physical paper copies of textbooks, and if work has been done around that? Is that part of the pilot? So that's really my question.
I'm sorry, both and.
Okay.
And so as we move forward, we've discovered in the last 17 months that kids can have access to electronic versions of text. The thing that comes with that is sometimes you can buy it and it's a one-to-one. So I have to buy one license per one book, or I can buy a book that I can keep sharing the password and username for. And so there's that as a consideration. Our MyView, MyVision, so our reading implementation, has both hard copy books for kids to engage in, and a lot of the texts are electronic as well. And so it does provide us a unique opportunity in K-5 literacy and our other selections to maneuver between kids having a physical book in front of them and being able to access through a Nook or a Chromebook some of the text. So it's both and. We're also looking at what the cost benefit of both of those things are, because we know that people are moving towards more electronic materials, but there is something to having kids open a physical book and turn the pages and being able to highlight with a highlighter that I do not want to be lost in the educational experience as we move to a hybrid environment of life.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if we have communicated well to the community that, we're trying to do more textbooks online, because that's one of the key things that we get criticized for, that, we don't have books for our students to bring home. We are criticized by that. Well, I haven't heard any criticism in the last few weeks. in the last few years. I don't know if that means that, the community has lost hope, but, we've got to in some way communicate that, we do have textbooks and they can take them home. And to your point about being able to highlight and reflect, I just think that, and to be able to, if they're not using it, if they're using it in school, but then when they go home, to be able to, again, review what they have discussed. So I think that's something that we have to really look into, that we are able to allow them to take the books home. And just one other thing, I'd like to be able to get this presentation before the meeting so that I can review it, please.
Ma'am.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Black, and forgive me for calling you Dr. Clark. I'm sorry. I'm trying to do all of these things at one time. So thank you very much. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the school reopening plans, and I believe that's the superintendent.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott, and good evening. I'll wait for the presentation to be loaded. So as we're waiting, oh, I run it? Okay, great.
Commissioners, you're able to refresh your board docs and see all the presentations in front of you as well, okay?
Awesome, thank you. So as you all know, I have yet to have 5 days per week of in-person learning in the Rochester City School District. So I approach September 8th, 2021 with enthusiasm, excitement, and optimism. I am so looking forward to seeing scholars, to seeing families as they drop their children off, and to certainly see staff in person in all of our schools and programs. We are coming from the framework of this essential question of how will the district open school in person 5 days a week beginning on September 8th, 2021. So this is just a brief update of where we are. There certainly is the priority for us to deliver instruction in person 5 days a week. As a district, we determined that only students who have applied for and been approved for a medical exemption will be able to receive remote instruction. A few months ago, we did send out to parents and families providing a medical exemption option. We received additional information saying that we could offer it for for medical exemptions. And so back a few months ago, we had about 1,500 students indicate. We have subsequently sent information saying it needs to be a medical exemption, and only a handful of families have submitted that information to the district, and that is being handled through Aaron Grotman, who oversees nursing services. We are using the Center for Disease Control guidelines as the basis for us moving forward. And as you know, our previous governor made mention that he would not provide guidelines, and also the Department of Health, Dr. Zucker, said the same thing. And so in the absence of no guidelines, coming formally from the state as they previously have come to us, we are using these guidelines which districts across the county and across the state are using as well. And these are the basis for us to open safely. Under the leadership of Deputy Superintendent Martinez Davis, she has led what we've called a reopening working group that has had up to 35 members of varied stakeholders who intersect with the district to talk through everything from learning modalities to what protocols we should have. And so there's been a series of about 8 meetings that have occurred in the months of April, May, June, and July, which were very productive. There were certainly many lessons learned over the past year, and one of them certainly is to ensure that we get stakeholder feedback. Additionally, we hosted focus groups with varied stakeholders, including students, teachers, our 4 unions, as well as parents and caregivers, to hear from them what their expectations, what their wishes and hopes and desires were for the 21-22 school year. Most recently, we certainly have held stakeholder meetings, and today, even, we had a very productive meeting that was very collaborative with all 4 of our union presidents, and they had the option to bring 2 additional representatives, and we went through step by step all of the things that we were looking at as a district. So everything from masking, PPE, the amount of PPE that we have at the school and the district levels. What types of social emotional supports would we have available in place, including a professional development for both students and our staff. Technology, we know that potentially we are going to have to quickly pivot from being in person to potentially remote, so we are preparing to make sure that academically that's not going to be difficult challenging, or strenuous on our scholars or our staff. We talked about how we stay connected with families and staff, how we're going to connect and receive visitors, as well as outside providers, and then just really making sure that the communication is clear and regular and consistent with updates. We also, I have been meeting weekly for the entire summer, every Tuesday with Dr. Mendoza, as well as my fellow colleagues from Monroe County Council of School Superintendents, and it's now under the leadership of Bo Wright, who's currently the superintendent from Rush Henrietta. This morning, Commissioner Rosa sent us a memo outlining that in the absence of guidelines from the aforementioned individuals, that the New York State Department of Education will provide some guidelines for districts that include things like remote learning, how you'll take attendance if you're in remote learning, et cetera. So we are awaiting guidance from Commissioner Rosa and her team, and we anticipate that that should be coming out momentarily. So as far as our current plan criteria, we obviously are starting in person on September 8th, 2021. We're going to institute a universal mask mandate. So that means everyone, whether you're vaccinated, unvaccinated, you will be expected to have a mask on your face at all times, short of taking a quick mask break, or if you're eating something or drinking something. So that, and we had that conversation with our union presidents and representatives today. We are going to maximize space. We will work to the extent practicable to maintain the 3 feet of distance. But as you know, if you read through the guidance and listen to what other individuals are doing, you may have to shorten that distance a little bit. But again, with the universal masking mandate, the research, our medical professionals are saying masking is critically important to keep individuals from becoming infected. We also will have a daily COVID-19 home screening, so we will work with our partners, our parents, in PLAC to make sure that that is widely articulated, as well as we'll work with our partners in Rock the Future. We'll work with our principals to make sure that everything from temperature checks to just having conversations with children to say, how are you feeling today, et cetera. We will have the weekly testing of staff, and we are currently working with some partners to ensure that we have lots of testing available at multiple sites. And then just to reinforce the universal masking, that also means universal masking is on our school buses. So drivers and scholars need to be masked as they are coming to school. As far as upcoming events are occurred, we have 2 major events. We're holding a staff forum on Friday, August 20th from 10 to 11:30 a.m., which will provide any staff member, any unit member, et cetera, to come and to hear some updates from myself and the team. And then on the next day, we're having our family forum on Saturday, August 21st, at the same time to make sure that we are connecting and engaging with parents. With that, that is my presentation for opening. We're not calling it reopening, it's opening because we did open back in February, but that's the current update. And I'll take questions, Vice President Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. President White?
Yeah, I submitted a question today. I think I directed it go to the question log, but it was about school safety and whether we were, I know in the past there's been challenges about getting bus drivers, and I know Mr. Schmidt is working and the administration is trying to come up with a plan to deal with that. But I also know from past meetings that Mr. Schmidt had indicated that there were challenges to us employing and getting certified the SSOs. And I wanted, in the question log question, it doesn't have to be answered today, but I wanted to have an update on that, and so that we could ascertain whether our children will have a full complement of SSOs for this upcoming school year, and if not, what the plans are to address that.
Thank you, President White. I get weekly updates from Chief Michael Schmidt, and as of today, we need to hire 10 more SSOs.
Commissioner Malloy, did you have any more questions, Mr. President?
Just, and again, it can be answered through the question log. Out of how many, so we need 10, but how many do we employ?
I'll get that through the question log then.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Commissioner Malloy?
So just several questions, just to piggyback on what President White has already said. I'm just wondering, when can we expect just a comprehensive safety plan for the year? Will there be an overview of that? I know just with the influx of violence that we've seen, a lot of students and families are feeling pretty nervous coming back, and so I just want to know what we're doing as a district to ensure that our students and families are feeling safe as we get closer to our opening.
Can I take them one by one? Because I
Sure,
know, I
yeah.
see you have a bulleted dissertation over there. So we are actually meeting with the chief to talk about our concerns relative to violence. You know that we also have a district safety plan that will be coming before the board, so there's information in there as well. So I believe by August 23rd, we should have safety plans coming forward to the board.
And I just want to interject, Commissioner, that I serve on that committee. So I will not be at the public hearing, but I do serve on that committee.
Thank you. Next question is just regarding our medically exempted students who will be learning remotely. I can assume, I guess, that there isn't going to be simultaneous instruction or
Correct.
the expectation for our
Correct.
teachers.
The medically fragile students will go through home hospital tutoring.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then finally, I know just today it was announced new bell schedules across the district. And so how can we best support our families with this big change? I know what the rationale behind this. With a shortage of drivers really nationwide, I know that prompted a lot of this. How can we best support our families with this huge change? I think a lot of families are going to have to, they'll be facing some childcare changes because of this, as well as some of our staff members. Are we doing anything to help support them in that regard?
We are. We had a lengthy conversation about that, and thank you for posing that question. So we are looking to allocate some supports for before and after school supports for our families that maybe need to drop off earlier than their new bell time that at their respective school. And for the public, I just want to be very clear that we have 3 tiers. The first tier, the bell change time is not changing, and it's changing for second and third. So that's 21, and it's just elementary school. So I just want to make sure for those who are listening, and it might be their first time hearing, that the bell times are changing. And then, so we're going to look at supports for families, and then for staff, we'll have to take that on a case-by-case individual basis to see if there's anything that we can do to help assist or remedy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner LeBron?
Thank you. I have several questions too. CDC guidelines also recommends testing, but also I realize we're not taking temperatures and just doing an evaluation for a student at home or self-evaluating. And so I just want to point out there have been plenty of times in my 18 years as a parent where I have sent my kids to school without a fever, and then a few hours later I got a phone call that they got a fever. And sometimes they started to develop that fever on the bus. So I am concerned that kids are going to be entering. And what happens if a parent, especially for parents who do have a bell time change and maybe they're dropping off to a child care center before they come to school. I'm just concerned that we're not going to be diligent about our part to temperature check our students. But in addition, the testing piece, I want to uplift that we should still be doing testing, especially with the Delta variant. And so I have lots of concerns, and so I'm trying to put lots of notes here. One, I want to focus on the federal American dollar, the rescue dollars.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Can I go back? Can I answer because I need to answer as you go.
Okay, go ahead.
So as far as the temperature checks, that was brought up to us today by the presidents, the union presidents and their representatives. So we said we would go back and take a look at it. It's not required, but we certainly are going to look at it. One of the things that we just need to examine certainly is, let's take Edison, for example, with 1,400 students. What is the amount of staffing? If we were to provide temperature checks for every single student that comes through, I actually had this discussion with Mike Schmidt today. It could add another probably 15 to 20 minutes to arrival to the school. So we're trying to see if there's something creative that we can do, or if students are saying they're not feeling well. So we are looking into that. But managing that, particularly at larger buildings, we would have to add multiple staff members for temperature checks.
So I just want to add, that brings me back to the Federal American Rescue Dollars,
Yes.
which are intended as well to not just mitigate the impact of COVID on education on kids, but for us to be able to safely reopen. And I want to uplift that the Delta variant is not the same COVID that we have been dealing with. And it is specifically, some of the conversations we were having around COVID were that, kids are scientifically less likely to get it or be able to bounce back because of the strain, because of their science in students' noses and their ages and their immune systems. Delta is not that variant. Delta is definitely the variant that is unfortunately very harmful, very impactful to children. And so I'm ready to send my kid back 5 days a week. I can have Sophia Monday through Friday. I will bring her. I don't care what bell time you assign me. That's me. I'm ready. However, I want her to also be safe. So I appreciate that we're doing 3 feet. I want us to have a plan for if we need to go 6 feet and what that looks like. But I also want to uplift, because I've been starting school walkthroughs just to kind of hear and see for myself what the plans are, what is it going to look like, how our lunchrooms are going to be structured. And I'm concerned that we're not using our dollars or even have a proposal to hire additional temporary staff. So let me uplift that. I am saying let's hire all of the adults that we can possibly get from temp agencies to open schools safely, even if it's on a first to second quarter basis, and then evaluate where we're at before we come back in January again, if we come back. And I want us to start having those conversations openly now and transparently, that there are schools in the South who have already opened, who have already been forced to go back to remote because of Delta. We're not going to be exempt from the conversation at Delta because we're in New York State or Rochester, New York. So I need to understand how we are applying the federal American dollars into safely reopening to address those things. You just said testing and temperature checking is going to not only add time, but at a cost. Well, those are temporary costs that are not intended to be long-term. Hopefully, we're not having this conversation in 3 years. Hopefully, more people go and get vaccinated. Hopefully, there's a vaccine for children. But as we're having these conversations, I just need to see that, because I can tell you that one of the schools I visited, the management, to managing lunches with 3 feet, and the spacing that they have, or the limited spacing and capacity, certainly they're not going to be the only school in this situation. Honestly, I was appalled, and I was not happy with the fact that this is how this is rolling out. We're in August having conversations, but I certainly could not support that this is the plan that we have for kids who have been out of school from a full-time basis for over a year, that we're like cramming them in little by little and utilizing our staff who should be teaching to supervise, and we can't get temps to support our staff in the schools to do these things, including temperature testing, supervising and supporting for meals, and those additional things.
Did you want a response to that, or you just?
So we can certainly, we have added some additional staff through the use of funds, and we can make sure that we share that, everything from paraprofessionals to supporting COVID needs. But yeah, we can make sure that we have that. One of the things that, you know, we can certainly look at, and as we said to the union representatives today, we can certainly take a look at the possibility of temperature checks, inserting them. We hadn't planned on it at this point, but that's something that we are looking at. Thank you.
Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that I do support local control, but I also embrace professionals, CDC, embrace their input, keeping us safe. I just want to talk about the support you said about in reference to this change in bell times. I've gotten quite a few texts today in reference to that, and so it was kind of blurry, and so I was hoping that we could tell the public some kind of way that they could access some actual information on what kind of support is going to be available, because some of these start times, well, the main ones that people have been asking me about is that 9:30 start time is extremely late for some people. I mean, it may even help attendance, but it's still inconvenient for a lot of parents. And so, are we going to have something on board docs or something maybe that people can access? Maybe a number that they can call, and other than me. You know,
You didn't see that in 8-point font that we put your number on there, Commissioner Adams? No, we actually had this conversation as well, and what we've decided is that parents should reach out to their respective school or program, and then the principals are going to be working with the chiefs to kind of put together what the concerns are, and we assume that most of it is going to be childcare or transportation relative to getting their children there, and we will group that together and we'll make sure that we have responses. But we can put that information together and get that to you so you have some talking points / information when the parents or community members are reaching out to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, my first question is going to be about the transportation, but you've already covered that. But one thing in your answer to Commissioner Malloy about the medically fragile students, have we already begun to increase the staffing for home hospital in response to that? I'm sure that the need is higher than was originally budgeted for. Have we already started hiring or transferring folk to the home hospital unit?
Not at this point. We only have, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think we only have 3 students who are medically fragilely approved. Because a parent may say, I want the medical exemption, but it has to, first, certainly we have to have the note from the medical provider, and then it goes through our process to look at it through Aaron Grotman's office.
Okay, so if I
Oh,
heard
it's
that-
9? Thank you. 9 or 10?
9.
Okay.
Okay, so, but you said there was something like 1,500 that had
Not for
declared it.
medical exemptions, just requesting remote.
Okay, but we still have to work through every one of those one at a time until either to convince them they have to show up in person or to get them that.
Well, what we've
medical
done
exemption.
is we reached out and we said that you need a medical exemption, please let us know. If not, you'll be in person 5 days a week. So we have 9 to date that have submitted.
Okay, so folks who wanted to stay remote are just, they're accepting the answer given? Or are we assuming they're going to accept the answer given?
Well, we can't make assumptions, but certainly, I mean, you get into other areas where if a parent or caregiver not sending, then we have to have conversations to encourage, and then we have to unfortunately take a different route that way, which we're going to work very diligently to avoid.
President White?
I just, very briefly, I wanted to lend my voice to the notion that you might hire temporary employees to take temperatures if it's logistically feasible and if the money is available. I think that if, you know, you can work it out in terms of timing, because I hear what you're saying about how having to take the temperature of every student, for example, at Edison, might create some logistical dominoes for you to address.
Sure.
But assuming, just for the purpose of this conversation, you can work that out and there is the money for it, I do think it is important to explore the option of taking the temperatures because, as Ron and many other people have pointed out, this Delta virus variant is nothing to play with.
It isn't.
And if we have the money to deal with that, and we can deal with the logistical issues, which we can't address here today. I really would appreciate if you looked at that.
I've taken it down.
Thank you. And then, and I know you've looked at this issue because you're a social worker by, a counselor by trade. The social emotional mental health issues that children are bound to have, and families, when they come back into schools full time. I assume that you are fully staffed and are prepared to have people to address those issues. Just in my own life and the run-ins that I've had with COVID and my family and friends and colleagues, it's a real devil in people's lives. And people, these children have been dealing with this in their families apart from the district for well over a year. And I know your team has been specifically prepared to deal with these issues. And I just want the community to know, those who happen to watching it, that this board and this administration are on top of that issue, because beyond the physical devastation that COVID caused, even those who did not get the virus themselves, it has wreaked havoc in these families' lives. And our mental health staff is going to be really challenged by that, and I want to make sure that they're adequately supported too. Thank you.
Thank you, President White. We are very grateful to the fact that our board has been very supportive of the resolutions that have come through. We have been very diligent and very mindful of the fact that we can't even begin to understand what's going to come across the threshold come September 8th and beyond. And so under the leadership of Deputy Superintendent Martinez Davis, our Executive Director Elizabeth Reyes, and you had a conversation briefly at the board meeting with Crystal Clark, our Director of Student Support Services. We've really spent a lot of time into looking at social emotional supports, not only for students, but for staff as well, because some of them have been sequestered away as well and teaching or administering their craft remotely. So we have everything from professional development to ensuring that we have provided training to our mental health practitioners around how to particularly work with traumative, sensitive students who are Black and brown. We have partnered with some of our community partners and organizations for them to provide wraparound. We've invested very significantly in trauma, illness, and grief supports. And one of those module focuses on receiving scholars back from COVID-19. So we can certainly send you that plan that we have that really outlines everything that we are doing and or either have done or intend to do, what's on the horizon. But that's something that is always on my mind. It's the thing that wakes me up at 2:37 a.m. in the morning about what our scholars have been through. They've been through a lot. And they've been through things that we have no touch points with and have no understanding. Some have been abused, traumatized, they've witnessed extremely traumatic events, so we are very cognizant. But I think the other thing that we've really worked on is that even though our counselors, our social workers, and psychologists are the practitioners who are trained and be dealing with it, to deal with this, we need to make sure that everyone really becomes an expert in social emotional learning. So everything from when the child gets on the bus, good morning, Van, it's so good to see you. When they get off the bus and they come into the school, good morning, Van, it's great to see you. How was your day? When they get into the classroom, and again, they're not counselors, social workers, or psychologists, but we're just trying to give some general tips and ideas. for everyone who is an educator in our district to really pay attention to social emotional learning.
Thank you. And Madam Superintendent, one thing that comes across my mind, this may be an opportunity, and I'm just thinking about it, so we have to research it, is getting our children involved in field trips. And somehow, you know, formalizing it where we are, you know, there is the kind of learning that we want. But I'm thinking that with, you know, with all of the stress, the mental stress, and people needing an outlet, it may be, I'll just offer it, if we can, you know, formalize field trips for the year, just so that there's an outlet for I was, and I'll just say that I was at Seabreeze on Saturday with my nieces that cost me a ton of money to get in. But it was so many people out there, and all I could think of was that, you know, people just wanted to get out. They just needed an outlet. And so I think it's the same for our students and families as well. So I would just offer that up for that to be considered as a part, some way, part of the curriculum. So thank you for that. And so the last
Vice President Elliott, I just thank you. I do want to respond to that because that's why part of our, you know, we have some unfinished business with learning. One of those veins, if you remember, or lenses and components of that was to have RCSD takes over ... So you saw Dr. Black in the back raising the roof and lifting her hands up because we have launched that and we had so many more takers than we thought we would have.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Because again, we have to remember from our little ones to our teenagers, some of them have been sequestered away, and just to get out and to go to Seabreeze or to go to the Rochester Museum and Science Center or to go roller skating, they're getting out and they're getting acclimated to just normal day-to-day interactions that were taken away from them because of the pandemic. So, you know, I think it was really important for us to initiate that, and the response that we've had where it was closed out in a very quick or short amount of time is proof of what you're saying, of our scholars just need to be out there and to do some normal, get back to some normal activity.
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. And the last presentation is with regard to improvement and receivership plans.
So as our chiefs are going to come up and present this as a team, and just as a reminder, we have multiple schools in receivership, and that translates to the fact that these are some of the lowest, they are the lowest performing schools in the district. We have reconfigured our chief of schools to have Rhonda to oversee schools who are in receivership at the elementary level. So she has a smaller number of schools, so she can really focus time and attention, establish residencies in those schools, and to really work with them. And then DeMario, who will be joining us in a few short weeks, will be focused on those schools at the secondary level. We just had the annual reports that have been revised very significantly with the chiefs and the principals, and they spent time. And so I'm really pleased to show you, and I'm looking forward to you looking at those documents. We want to walk you through one to show where we have demonstrable indicators. Those are the indicators that if they don't meet a certain level, then you have a certain number of those in layperson's terms, which makes you a school in receivership. And academic achievement certainly is huge and embedded in those. But they have really taken those plans, completely revised them to make sure that each demonstrable indicator for each school clearly has a goal, activities, and we'll be monitoring that. So President White, over the next few months that you're here with us, you will be able to see that. I know that it's important to everyone. But we are really being very purposeful. And again, I'm very appreciative that you allowed me to add another chief, because I truly believe it's going to make a difference and allow us to really give the time, attention, support that each one of our schools, particularly those that are more challenged academically, they'll be able to get that through their work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Peluso.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, President White, Vice President Elliott, Board Commissioners, for giving us the opportunity to share the process we did for developing school improvement plans this year. As you know, all of the work that schools do are grounded in our strategic plan, but today, really focusing on that, providing high-quality learning experiences. So before we start, we just want to share the improvement plans that we're going to be reviewing. So there's a school comprehensive education plan, and those plans are done for all schools that are non-receivership schools. So every school that is not a receivership school does a school comprehensive education plan. The state has revised the school comprehensive education plan this year that looks a little bit different than they've had in previous years, and they really asked schools to use their SEP plan, the school comprehensive education plan, to pursue your school's aspirations and values. So they look very different than they've had in previous years. And then,
Dr. Peluso, can you just give an example of what you mean by pursue your school's aspiration and values? Can you clarify that?
I'm going to get to that when we talk a little bit about commitments. Absolutely.
Okay.
And then the second plan that we'll talk about today is about continuation plans. And continuation plans are documents that are submitted to the state and are focused on our receivership schools. So the school comprehensive education plans, our SEP plans, schools have been asked to center their focus around 2 to 4 commitments. And the commitments are really centered around what they believe their school should look like and what they aspire their school to look like. Schools have flexibility to identify what these commitments are. In previous years, schools had to find goals on ELA, math, English language proficiency. They were very directed in what they had to find goals for. This really was an organic process in terms of working with students and interviewing students to find out what it is that their school should look like. So one of the crucial and most crucial parts of the SEPs this year was student interviews. So schools needed to interview students and say, basically, what worries may you still have as you return to school? Right? And then they also needed to complete an equity self-reflection. And this equity self-reflection focused on welcoming and affirming environments, high expectation and rigorous instruction, and inclusive curriculum and assessment, as well as ongoing professional learning. Once all of that was done, looking at data sources, schools were then they made commitments. They created a commitment for their school comprehensive education plan. And the commitments varied really based on what the school need is. So you may get a commitment, and I put an example here, is we commit to strengthening our Tier 1 research-based instructional practices. So that may be a commitment that a school has made, and that's come from interviews.
Carmine, can you just explain Tier 1 just briefly? Okay,
yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. So Tier 1 is the high-quality first instruction that teachers provide in the classroom. So it's that instruction that reaches all of the students and should be hitting 85% of our students and 90% of our students. So that is high-quality Tier 1 instructional strategies. So when you look at a commitment, under that commitment, you'll see the reasoning as why the school chose this commitment. So in the plan, you will see the commitment, and then you'll see why they identified this commitment. What was the survey responses they received? What are the strategies that's going to advance this commitment? And then how they're going to gauge success and the resources necessary for the commitment. The one thing you'll see with the SEPs that I really think, as you review them, because you will get the SEPs for all the schools that you're board liaisons for, what you'll see is that this document is really written to be forward-facing, to the parents, to the school community, where previously they were written for the state, right? They were very state language, very state-centered. These documents here are really read as to why a school is doing what they're doing from the school lens and what they've learned from interviews and other information. Other Examples of what you may see, like what we've seen, some of the commitments will be around academic rigor. They may be on culturally responsive instruction, a lot on social emotional learning. We know our kids, have some social emotional learning concerns when they come back. So a lot of the commitments are written around that, as well as our multi-tiered systems of support. So how are we going to support kids instructionally, socially, emotionally, and academically? So that's the plan. That's how the planning process went. Also, throughout this, involving your school-based planning team and others in the process. So when you receive your SEPs this year, they're going to look very different than what you've seen in the past. We'll read more friendly and will be much more friendly for our parents and our school community to see. What happens with receivership plans is a different process. They're demonstrable. They're focused on demonstrable indicators, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rhonda to take us through that.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we did different for our receivership schools in relation to our plans. Very much like the SEP plans, the SEP have big commitments that each school commits to. We have big boulders, big rocks identified for each school of what they're going to do to move the work in a school. So what we did is we met with each individual school and helped them focus. Show you. So we went through the 4 disciplines of execution and in looking at these plans, what we're going to have to do to move this work. The difference between the commitment, the continuation plans and the SEP plans, like Carmine was saying and Superintendent Myers-Smalls was saying, is that there's demonstrable indicators. And what makes it really tricky is each school has between 12 and 17 demonstrable indicators. And when you want to focus a school to have 12 different measurements makes it really tricky. So what we did is we took those demonstrable indicators and put them into some big buckets, like the commitments in the SEP plan. So we really help schools focus on what are your priorities, what are you working on, and turn those into measurable goals. So we have these big rocks that we want to move. The next thing that we had to do is identify what are the levers, what are the 2 things we're going to do within our school that's going to move those rocks, and then ultimately how we're going to track that data and keep people accountable to this data. What we wanted as chiefs was to be able to walk into every building and say, show us your data throughout the year, and hold them accountable to that data, and allow principals to do that with their teachers.
Let me just, Madam Superintendent, are we going to do that? Are we going to hold them accountable?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
That's our goal. And the principals did this work. We really had to get the principals invested in how are we measuring the work that we're doing. What's tricky about the demonstrable indicators is that they're lag measures. There's measures that happen at the end of the year, and we have 12 of them. So we can't just wait till the end of the year to hit those goals. We have to have some targets that are going to get us there. So when you look at these plans, for every demonstrable indicator, you're going to see a goal, a measurable goal. You're going to see 2 lead measures that are going to move that goal. You're going to see how they're going to hold their schools accountable and create those scoreboards. So I'll walk you through a sample. I don't know if you can see this. This is School 10. They're focusing on the lag measure, which is school safety. And they said, okay, school safety is a lag measure. We know at the end of the year how many instances of extreme discipline we have in our building. And so they wanted to reduce the amount of referrals that they had. So they're focusing their goal on reducing referrals. We will move from 400 to 220 referrals by the end of the year. It's an ambitious goal. What are the 2 things we're going to do as a school to move that goal? And they have identified 2 lead measures. And then how are they going to track that data? So now as chiefs or anybody here who wants to go into a school, you can ask to see their scoreboards. We're going to have those created throughout the year so that we have those systems in place. And then to make it kind of give us a big picture, we created a snapshot of every school. So we have one document that has every school, all 3 lead measures, or all 3 strategies, and the lead measures that go with it, and how we're tracking it, so that anyone can kind of see what that work is. These need some work. The goals that we created are a little bit fuzzy. We're cleaning those up. We're going to spend the next 2 months really working with each individual principal to make sure that these goals are stellar and that they're measurable. And now I'm going to shift over to letting Shirley know our next steps.
Good evening, commissioners. And so as we talk about this work, it's important that we recognize where we are and where we're going and identifying those next steps. So looking at both the SEPs and the continuation plan, we want to make sure that we're in unison across the district. Just because you're a receivership school, we don't want us to think that we're not looking deeply at our non-receivership schools. So in terms of our next steps, these documents will continue to evolve as living documents. As we create the commitments, as we look at the lead strategies and measurements, we want to make sure that we're always going back to the document and revising it so that we're moving toward the end goal. The other thing we talked about is establishing data tracking systems. So when Rhonda talked about being able to go into a school and see the data, see how it's moving, as Commissioner Elliott said, holding us accountable, we'll be able to look at these tracking systems and see where we are and how are we progressing toward meeting those goals. The other thing, as we do this work, it's important that we have professional development, that it's aligned to the district as well as to each of the plans so that we can move that academic performance. Throughout this process, as school chiefs, we will be going into our buildings, doing walkthroughs with the principals. In order to know what's happening, you have to see it, and so we have to be in those classrooms working side by side with our principals to ensure that the implementation is happening, to ensure academic rigor. And then finally, we'll be working with our schools to develop action plans. So as we're going into the buildings and we see something happening, we want to come back and sit with those principals and develop action plans on how to ensure that we're moving academic performance, that we're meeting those indicators, whether it's suspension or decreasing disciplinary referrals, monitoring attendance, that we will be developing action plans along the way to meet those goals. So as we bring all of this together, it's about moving forward with our school principals. And that ends our presentation. Any questions?
Let me start off by asking, Dr. Jallo, do you have any questions for the chiefs?
Yeah, actually, I'm a little bit curious about specifically what they're going to do to make sure that other schools don't become receivership or don't go to the next level of receivership. And as stated in the plan, I'm curious as to how you're going to operationalize the legislation that gives more authority to the superintendent in reference to the receivership schools.
Receivership? I'm not.
Yep. So,
We're going to have you repeat, Dr. Jallo, just a little bit
difficult.
louder. We're going to turn up the volume on that.
I'm curious about specific steps that chiefs are going to take to not only support the schools that are in receivership, but the many schools that are close to going into receivership, preventing them from going into receivership. So I'm very curious about that. And I'm also curious about making sure that, which schools have we identified, which schools are closest to coming out of receivership and being standing? What are we doing to push them over the edge? So I'm trying to understand how you're going to focus your efforts around particular groups of schools. One so that they don't go into receivership, another group so they can come out of receivership, and then that third group to make sure they don't go from superintendent receivership to independent receivership, similar to the status that East currently has.
I think those are wonderful questions. I'd say first, to kind of focus the work, Dr. Morris and her team have worked to develop a theory of action for our schools, specifically our receivership schools. That's going to lay the groundwork for how we're going to unroll it this year, the work that we want to do this year. And there's some phenomenal things in there in creating a plan. I think when we look at our data and what we're talking about tonight is making sure that every school is very clear in how they're measuring their progress. So what we've done in the past, Dr. Jallo, is we've had these demonstrable indicators, but we haven't had really good systems for tracking data within the schools, especially progress monitoring throughout the schools. So being able to do that now with the work that we're doing with principals is going to allow us to kind of monitor those schools that are on the tipping point to ensure that they don't tip over. And I feel very confident that's something that we can do. Did that address your question?
Yeah, I mean that's fine. I mean, we can meet and learn more about what that looks like. But I think at this point it's time to really talk specifics, because you have specific issues that need to be addressed. And these schools meet with the state every month, and they are required to go through specifics around their data and specifics around how the district is specifically supporting these schools as opposed to in a different fashion than they would their other schools. And that's been an area of weakness for the districts. I just want to make sure that that's considered as you guys are moving forward.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Anything you want to add to that, Madam Superintendent? No, I'm good. All right. Okay, I'm going to start to my left. Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, so a few questions too. One, I do remember for a while we were having conversations with previous superintendents, and I remember it came up with this administration around the data dashboard. So just wondering how you're utilizing the data dashboard and all the efforts that went into implementation to that, to then going into like a Google Doc form. And why wouldn't principals have access to the data dashboard to like upload? So that's the first question. The second piece, I just want to uplift principals understanding the data. So as you know, this came up, I won't mention the school, but there was a school that we had a leadership meeting at, and the principal's status, she also did not understand from lack of training from the district as well, but just understanding what the state's measurements are and what they were measuring. And so I am glad to see that, like, for this example here, that it is a workable, identifiable, goal, achievable goal of saying 10 students versus we're going to change the entire system in this year, which is impossible. But identifying the students who are causing those concerns that then put us on these lists for like persistently violent, when in reality it was maybe 1 or 2 incidents with students. And I would love for us to figure out a way to educate our parents around that too, because it is so convoluted to understand why 1 or 2 serious incidents can put us on that list, because I think it changes the perception once you fully understand how we're being measured against those things. So I appreciate that there's this here and that this is achievable. But just understanding what happened to the data dashboard, and I think I heard you, Dr. Green, when you mentioned making sure principals have training. But can you just explain a little bit more about, like, give me an example of what that training would look like for principals?
So first, Commissioner, in terms of the data dashboard, that's the Rock 3D, and the principals do have access to that. And I'll use that as an example of professional development. We're working to plan our professional development, and one of them will be going through the process of understanding how to navigate through Rock 3D so that they can have the data in front of them. They know where they need to go, and working with us to create that action plan on how to move that data to meet their goals. So that's an example of a professional development around the data dashboard system of Rock 3D.
President White, did you have any questions?
Yes. First, a comment. I was here what I would call the dark ages of the SEP plans. And what would happen is they were really compliance documents. And the state did not really help out in that regard. They sent these boilerplate forms and people had to fill them out, and they did it often at the last minute just to satisfy the powers that be in Albany. And they really weren't looking at how they could really improve, the operative word there is improve, their schools. And I thought we had moved into more enlightened areas, because I will tell you, the stuff that you guys are talking about, I've seen chiefs do. I've been to walkthroughs where chiefs have had with iPads, I don't know what they're called, and they literally were looking at data. So it sounds to me, some of the presentation I heard sounds to me like we weren't doing that. I can tell you, I have been through walkthroughs with chiefs. I can't remember who they were exactly. Carmine, you might have been one of them, where I've been in the presence of principals that they were talking about what was going on in the classroom, and the chief was literally looking at the data. So that data dashboard that people are talking about, I think that was the era in which it was happening, and I've been on multiple ones. So I don't want people to get the impression that there hasn't been some use of data in terms of today's digital technology, because I have witnessed it, and I was quite impressed by it. And I think it accounts for some of the gains that we made, for example, in the graduation rate, because people were watching what was happening in the classroom. And I just wanted to give kudos to prior administrations and prior chiefs, because I've seen that happen. The other thing that I wanted to say is that we have to, I talked at the prior meeting about data tracking systems, that to the extent that they are not up to speed and they can't give us real-time information, that's a problem for this district. With the technology they have today, there's really no excuse for us saying, and I think some people were a bit bothered when I said it, but there really is no excuse for us not being able to do this today. And this shouldn't be something we should be looking at. When I hear people say, and again, don't take offense to, I'm just doing my job, I'm speaking the truth. When I hear people say we're working on developing those systems, that just to me, this is not acceptable. And I got to say that, folks, I do. And I'm not looking at anybody in particular, but you all do your jobs. My job is, as I would say, I can't speak for my other colleagues, but my job is I'm an accountability officer. And if I can't talk the language of accountability and talk about the tools that are necessary to hold people accountable, then I'm not doing my job. So I just want you all to know, when I made that comment the other day, and I make it today, it is 2021. It is totally unacceptable that we would be saying, and again, I'm sorry if people feel offended by this, we're working on a system to track our students. That shouldn't be said. And you're being honest when you say that that's what's happening, and I appreciate the honesty, but I'm responding honestly, not looking at anybody in particular. That's just not acceptable. And when we talk about us having the lowest ELA and math scores, that's one of the reasons why. No one's expecting us to have, I know people want 100% of our students at 4s, 3s. That's not going to happen. It's not even happening in the suburbs, right? But where we're at, you know, schools that I've been in, it's way too low. The technology poverty doesn't cause that. It's a lack of using the advantages of modern day technology to attract those students that's causing that. So. And then the other thing observation I want to make is we absolutely will resume leadership meetings. You want to talk about the accountability conversations, all the stuff that people are talking about now, graduation rates, attendance, these are key performance areas. Graduation rate, attendance rates, suspension rates, ELA scores, math scores, gross scores, those are all key performance areas. And when we had our leadership meetings at the schools every week, I think it was every Friday at like 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning. Those are the conversations that we were having with principals. Not with the superintendent was there, of course, but we were having those conversations with principals and whoever the principal decided to bring in. And you want to talk about a living and breathing document, that finish line report has been modified over the years. Shirley, you've been around for a while. Carmine, you've been around. We have evolved that document so that it meets the needs of principals and chiefs and superintendents. But I'm convinced that COVID hurt us in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that it hurt us is we weren't having those regular weekly conversations with principals and their staffs and chiefs and the superintendent about, and here's a principal question on those finish line reports. It's not just numbers, but where you're at and where you need to be. That's what we were talking about. Those finish line reports were very clear. It not only had an assessment of where the student population was at that school, but where they needed to be and where they said they were going to be. And when there was this conversation about I don't know if you remember this, Cynthia, or anybody who was around, we sometimes would see finish line reports that would say, I'm just taking this for example, we would have, they would say a 75% graduation rate, or it would have an astronomical number on ELA scores, math scores, or out of school suspensions. And I would say to them, how'd you get that number? How did you come to the conclusion that you were going to have 75, 80% of your kids graduating on time? And they would say, they looked to the superintendent, of course you weren't here, and they'd look to the right and look to the left. And I would say to them, this has got to be your number. You have to own it. We know where you're at, but where are you going to be? So I just want to, I'm putting everybody on notice, but including our clerk, who unfortunately has to bear the burden of scheduling those meetings. We will be having those leadership meetings every Friday, particularly at the leadership schools, at receivership schools. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that one initiative that I began that did not go over well with the superintendent, and I regret that I just didn't push him on it, was what I used to call the striking distance report. Some of you may remember that, but Dr. Jallo, you talk about trying to make sure that we know where the receivership schools are at and how we're going to get them out. The striking distance report talked about that. I said, list the schools that are this close to coming out of receivership and what resources, Dr. Jallo, and my colleagues who are at these meetings will recall. I would say at the end of the striking distance report, at the finish line report, what do you need from us, the Board of Education, while the superintendent was there, to get you to where you need to be? And the striking distance report specifically identified schools that were this close, because what we need is those schools to get off that list. And what we need is the hope that comes from that happening. And for whatever reason, like all of us board members do, I backed off. We did it for about a year, and we stopped doing it, and I regret that. Because I think if you focus not only what needs to get, what you're measuring that needs to get done, but who is close to getting it done, that allows you to get to where you need to be. So the other thing I'm putting you all on notice on, in my last 5 or 6 months, we will be resuming the striking distance reports. We will have a sense as to what schools are close and what you as chiefs are doing to get them the resources they need to get off that damn list. So on notice, we're going to resume the leadership meetings, and we are definitely going to resume striking distance reports. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
The school set plan, the first page where it had, I don't know why this is not a part of the receivership plan. Based on student interviews, student voice you're actually using, that's great, but I think that should also be a part of the receivership thing. I think school-based planning teams being highly involved, I can recall a couple years ago that there were schools that weren't in compliance, and then we had said that we were going to make sure that all the schools were in compliance, and I've heard no more about it. I thought we had gotten in compliance. The way this is written is if maybe everybody's not involved, maybe everybody's not in compliance. So I think we make a lot of noise sometimes about some stuff, and then we just let it go. But I really think this needs to be highlighted. It should be a part of the receivership thing. Student interviews, school-based planning teams, and maybe it is. Maybe it is. But it's just not laid out on the presentation like that. That's all I got.
Commissioner Malloy, did you have any questions?
Just a comment more than anything, just to say thank you so much for this work and so critical. Really looking forward to visiting schools and having that consistency across the board. So I'm looking forward to, visiting the schools and maybe having each of those plans laid out when I go for visits. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Malloy. Commissioner Powell, did you have any questions? All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the presentation. And just before we close, there's just one thing that I'd like for us to, we don't have to talk about it here, but I'd like to put it on the next ESA meeting. I think what we should do, Madam Superintendent, is the president just talked about doing leadership meetings, but I think what we should do is take each school, this committee of the whole, take each school to find out what is needed, what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, how we can support. I don't think we've ever done that. And I'm interested in us doing that. So I will just sort of, pose that for this meeting, but to have further conversation around, what is it going to take? What does each school need in order to get it to where it's being successful? And I'd like to have that conversation at the next ESA meeting to see what my colleagues think about doing that. So, all right, Dr.
Jallo.
Dr. Jallo.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the state meets with each of these schools on a monthly basis and meets informally and visits the schools every month and checks their data and interviews different people and meets with staff and sometimes meets with students and goes into classrooms every month through the pandemic. So if you continue to have these meetings or you want to dig deeper, I would also suggest that they have reports that might enlighten you as to strengths and weaknesses and what's going on in
All right.
receivership schools as well.
Thank you, Dr. Jallo. Anything else good for the order? Okay, so I'm told we've got to go into another executive session.
We can.
It's, I'm sorry, Vice President, Elliott, my bad. I didn't explain it correctly. We need to speak to council about a potential contract with a vendor. Is that the best way to describe it?
To receive legal advice.
Legal advice.
Issues surrounding contracting, so you could probably adjourn this meeting,
Adjourn the
go into closed session, and we don't have to come back out and take an action on another.
All right, thank you. So motion to adjourn?
So moved.
What, wait.
He says, we got to go slow.
Let me just get to that page so you guys can do that.
Talia, you're right. This isn't so bad. You get a little bit used to it.
It's not bad at all. It's not bad at
I have
all.
to confess,
It
it's not
really
so bad.
isn't. Okay, you can take the motion now. Who motioning?
I sec, did I move or second?
You moved.
I moved.
Yeah, you moved.
Seconded.
And who seconded, sorry?
Commissioner Adams.
Okay. Okay, you may now vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Still waiting for the box to.
Thank you.
Thank you. So are we good? Are we good? All right, thank you, everybody. We'll go into,
Session with our
Oh, there
lawyer.
it is.
go into a session with our lawyer.
I guess you.
Thank you.
The